And as we engage today, all our sessions are highly interactive. Of course, this is Zoom, this is online. I can hardly do a high five. And that makes it very interesting to have an interactive session. However, we would like to invite you to chat as much as possible, to send in questions, to respond when questions are asked. And from wherever you're at, if your energies go low, please sip some water, take some tea, some coffee, stretch a bit while we are on the call, so that one, you stay very physically alert and we are able to learn from each other and to benefit from this session. I see Marco is saying hello, Marco from DGF. Yes, it's good to see you, Marco, and it's good to see a number of team members from your team. We have a number of DGF team members, so it's good to see you all. And so at this point, I would like us to get started into the real subject of our session. And I would like us to just close your eyes for half a second and smile and welcome Ethan Musolini in the room. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you, Julia, for that introduction. And welcome again, members. Just to be sure that you're able to hear me, I would love to see I would like to see the team typing in, yes, we can hear you, Ethan, and then it will, okay, good, I'm seeing yes, yes. And so that's great, can hear you. Marco says yes, and says yes. I'm seeing Hope's hand. I don't know what Hope is saying. Hope, please go ahead, unmute yourself. I've allowed you to talk, just go ahead, please. Hope, there's an image of a phone, not a phone, a microphone. So you can unmute yourself and say what, because I'm seeing your hand, I'm just curious what that is. That could be something. Or you could just type a message, then Julia can alert me in the, as you communicate, whatever that is, because I'm not able to hear you in any way, okay. All right, so again, it's been great to see you keeping time, especially it was good to see everyone streaming in way before time. Thanks, Julia, for the introduction. I appreciate all of you who invested either your personal resources or it's the organization or the organization paying for you. I appreciate the management that approved, because we have teams here where the organization paid. So I really appreciate that fact that you honor yourself as an individual if you invested in yourself, and if you are the management team like DGF, where you really acknowledge and respect your staff to invest in them. And my promise to you is that we'll make this super valuable. Just pick your pen and paper or notebook, and I will run through a couple of thoughts. I'll be pausing in between to ask questions, and then Julia will also join us later to present on a certain segment. In case you don't know me, my name is Ethan Musolini. I've been in this space of coaching, training, and consulting since September 2003, and I've been in 25 countries, and I've published 4 books. And most importantly, in regards to this particular segment that we are talking about, I've gone through different kinds of crises myself. As I recall, the way back, September 9/11, I was just in Arlington, Virginia, doing an internship one class, and Arlington is very close to Washington, DC. You know, there's a plane that hit there, and then when I was there, there was a crisis in the US when the planes they crashed into the World Trade Center, and now here I was dealing with all these emotions in a foreign land, and there was chaos, let's call it commotion. And I noticed firsthand how different leaders like Rudy Giuliani, who was the mayor of New York then, was leading in a crisis close hand, and those who were trembling before the crisis. I know that even as Success Africa, I recall 2011, we were at a moment whereby the bills were this big and the income was this small, and it was a critical moment. Just quite, it was a financial crisis moment, 2011, in that some of the directors were saying, you know what, we have to close shop. And in my heart, I say, you know what, no, for me, this is my calling. No matter what, I have to find a way. So that was a crisis in that moment. I have seen firsthand how to lead in a moment. I was debating whether to share this or not, but for purposes of putting this into context, it would be very useful still. In that late last year, I was in crisis mode when I had to dance between the theater corners, whereby we were expecting a baby, and I had to I was in a theater in there with my wife, and it was a complicated operation, and then the baby was struggling for breath. And here I had to stay calm as a leader. I noticed in the moment to be able to calm down my wife in the moment, and also be able to encourage my daughter, hopefully, to make it. Unfortunately, our daughter didn't make it. This is the first time I'm sharing it in public. But for this context, I thought it would be very useful. That's what I feel inspired to say. But I recall in that moment that I had to step up as a leader, to stay calm, to still give my wife encouragement no matter what, and also I remember giving encouragement to the doctors when they were doing their best to pump oxygen into my daughter. And they were amazed that in that moment I could still keep encouraging them, even though this was that my daughter was dealing with. But what I learned in that moment is that even in the most critical of moments, how do you stay calm and keep pushing yourself to inspire people around you? And that's leading in a crisis, because the doctors, I remember, my mother-in-law said that the doctors were sharing, they said they'd never seen someone as strong in the circumstances then as I was. Of course, by God's grace, made it through. And whereas unfortunately, we lost our baby, we've managed to recover, thankfully. And that was also one of my biggest lessons around crisis management. So, or leading amidst a crisis. So in this program, that's what I'm hoping to share with you by the end of tomorrow. Today we'll look at both the big picture, but also some ways of thinking, and some tools, and then tomorrow we'll cap it up. So now on that note, I would like to switch the gears and go to the screen. I need to share the screen. Let me see if I can share my PowerPoint quickly. Okay, it should be the one. Okay, cool. All right, if you're able to see the PowerPoint screen, please let me know right away. Okay, Humphrey is saying, can you activate visuals so we see which people are on the call? All right, so Julia, you could see how to do that in terms of how we can activate the visuals. Okay, Hope says they can see the screen. And then Humphrey, let me know if you're able to see the visuals. Then Julia, you can keep track of whether people are able to see the visuals and who is on the call and who is not. Okay, so you can see the screen. Fantastic. So leading powerfully amidst a crisis. So there are a couple of things that I would like to highlight, and in terms of what we'll be focusing on today. This is what you should expect to learn. We are going to have 2 sessions, but in session 1, we'll look at understanding crisis. We'll talk about what great leaders do in great phases of a crisis. Look at profiling the fears and challenges of your team amidst a crisis, that you know how to respond and how to manage. And then we will then also look at establishing the firm's position, tools for the prepared leader. Those are the tools we'll end with for today. The plan is, if all goes well, depending on, we are planning to finish at 4. So in session 2, which will be tomorrow, we'll look at what usually makes it difficult to identify different phases of a crisis, and look at 6 competencies for leading powerfully amidst crisis, and a framework for crisis communication. So, and then that will be, those are the things we'll be looking at today. Okay, cool. I mean the next 2 sessions. All right, let's look at session 1. And I like starting with defining concepts, because I don't want to assume that everyone knows what a crisis is. And in this case, I like using the word business crisis, or let's call it an organizational crisis. It's any unexpected event or situation that an organization or business is facing or is looming and has high potential to have negative impact with their consequences. And just to clarify, we are recording this. We'll give you the slides, we'll give you the workbook. So just note what is useful to you. You don't have to write everything. For example, I don't expect you to write this definition, because we'll send you the materials as the day goes by. So when we talk about this also is, you can lead in a crisis in whatever moment or whatever the situation is, depending on the context, okay? You cannot continue to lead the same way during a crisis. You have to lead differently in a crisis. And a business crisis or an organizational crisis has the potential to threaten financial well-being, and we've seen that happen in different contexts, whether it is as we speak or in the past. It dents the institutional reputation and erodes public will. I know, for example, there is a big organization which was involved in financial mismanagement or impropriety, and as a result, its reputation was really dented, and a lot of public goodwill was eroded. Of course, I know now they are rebuilding that, but that's what can happen. It renders the survival strategy of a firm or an organization obsolete. When it's really huge, you know, the very existence of an organization can really disappear, literally. And then it creates tension and contributes to loss of trust among employees, especially when here I'm talking about, say, a crisis that was triggered internally. When that happens, I've seen leaders go head to head on each other. I've seen some employees question the validity or the value or the relevance and trust of these organizations in such heated moments. Then it can solicit negative counteractions from stakeholders. They can decide to hit back if the crisis is so huge and so big, and they feel very uncomfortable about that. That can be rather huge challenge. Now, let's talk about why the current lockdown can trigger a business crisis, an organizational crisis. You see, when we put things into perspective, you'll notice a couple of things, that it was once considered to be thousands of miles away. And there was an expectation that China, for example, would contain this outbreak. Those were some of the thoughts. It was wrongly perceived as a national concern and not necessarily an immediate concern for individuals or organizations. You know, there was an imagination that it is far, far away, that it's not going to affect you and I or in our different businesses. We know that the current virus was not immediately linked to people, that is employees, customers, suppliers, and leaders, and ultimately how these are critical for sustainable production and and productivity levels. So all that was not looked at. So in terms of moving forward, when you look at all this in terms of the dynamics, what has happened, if we are to analyze the situation as is, there's been cancellation, reduction or abnormal escalation of orders placed. I was reading the report by Uganda Tourism Board, and you know that the hospitality industry has been the most affected, has been one of the most affected in my view, apart from, say, health. And I know one of the participants on this webinar is in the hospitality industry. We know that every cancellation costs, is a cost on average $114,000. That's huge. And when we say 114,000, that is in the chain, the food chain. It's not just one particular business. When a tourist, for example, comes through, when you look at the whole chain, that's been huge, huge hit. Increased stress levels among the employees. There have been delayed salaries, redundancy, uncertainty, and there are organizations that have closed, both in the private sector and the non-for-profit sector. The salaries have been delayed. All that has increased stress levels. As a matter of fact, we as Success Africa, we are planning to do research around mental health and also do a program around the same, because we believe that this crisis or any kind of crisis in an organization really has a huge impact when it comes to mental health. The stress, the worries, the concerns, that's always a huge, huge challenge. There's rapidly changing donor priorities and reporting protocols. And I'm sure I know we have people in the non-for-profit space here on this webinar. The priorities are changing, because now I know, for example, the Red Cross, we have an idea what they do. Recently, I had they partnered with MTN, which is fantastic, to raise awareness and funds and contributions towards helping people in this crisis. And as you can imagine, so their priority has, whatever they had planned, now it has changed to paying attention to what's happening now. And even all of us here on this call, our priorities have changed, whether you're a donor or in a business or a consultant like me, the priorities have changed all of a sudden, because that's also one of the reasons we had to respond to create this program. The unexpected budget freezing, cuts or reallocations. So there are new dimensions happening right now. There are people whose budgets have been cut, of course, or frozen, and there are different reallocations depending on how things are shifting and moving, because some have been frozen because there isn't an assurance of what's going to happen next or moving forward. There's been sudden requirement for new skills and knowledge to manage the changes ushered in. There's a need now to, how do we manage the digital economy, for example, whether it is to appear on a Zoom call like this, whether it's present one, how do you stay productive in a remote space? And that's something we will be, most likely next week, we'll be doing a program around that. How do we help people to become more productive while working from home? Because it requires a different skill set. How do you manage the distractions at home? For example, I have 2 girls in my home. So how do you manage that? So that's something that will be, that is a skill that is required at the moment. There's a sudden change in services and products, especially for people in the private sector, whether it is the changing market in the standard operating procedures. For example, something as basic as before you enter, you must use sanitizer. That was not there before. Now it's a must, literally. The new systems have to be installed. It means also for organizations like VGF have to realign and figure out, okay, how do we measure, or what sort of tracking systems do we need to have for these organizations that we are funding? Because now, if they're in a lockdown, it's a different mindset. It's possibly a different system from when everything was flowing freely. What are the new legal and regulatory frameworks? Because what happens when you have to cut the contract suddenly, whether you're in the private sector, non-for-profit sector? What do you do? What are the frameworks? Last time someone was asking. Then there's new workplace culture now. And of course, some of these things, they are not poorly planned for because they were sudden and inadequately communicated. And so how do we manage things like flexi time? If someone who is now working from home, how do we track that? How do we manage that? And when we say all this, we also need to ask ourselves, what are the different types of crisis? Now, according to the Institute for Crisis Management, there are two kinds. One is the smoldering crisis. It's perceived as the responsibility and fault of the firm's leadership, meaning it is created, it is internally created, it is self-created. Call it self-sabotage or self-creation of a crisis. And when we say sudden crisis, it means there are unexpected events in which the organization has virtually no control and perceived limited fault or responsibility. In other words, that is from the outside, okay? Now, it would be good to know what are some of the examples of smoldering crisis in your organization. And I've seen, I believe I've seen Hope's hand. Hope, you can go ahead and say something. I've allowed you to talk, so you can unmute yourself and yes, Hope.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon, Hope. Not everyone is on unmute, so not everyone may be able to say, but good afternoon.
Oh, thank you very much for giving me this opportunity.
Yes, please.
I was going to give an example of a place whereby the building caught fire, and when the staff members reported to work, they found nothing.
Wow.
And it was such a shock. That's the example I had. It was such a shock, but they had to look for a way of managing the crisis.
Wow, wow. So cool. Thanks, Hope, for sharing that. And you can mute yourself again. And so that's an example of a sudden crisis. And it would be good to know what are some of the examples of a smoldering crisis. And you can raise your hand. When you raise your hand, I'll be able to allow you to talk. At the moment, all of you are in mute form. Any example, and you can also type, or you can type an example of a smoldering crisis, or you can raise your hand and I can. Hope has already jumped ahead of the queue and given us an example of a sudden crisis. And Julia, if you see someone who has contributed or shared an example, you can alert me so that I know what that is before we move on to the next segment. An example, you can type in the chat box and we will be able to pick it up from there. If not, then let me see if we have anyone in the chat. Okay, all right, cool. So I know that one of the part of the smoldering crisis, as an example, let me see if I can pick up an example here. I recall there was an equal, let me see, ignoring, Elizabeth says, ignoring staff contributions and pleas, yeah? Absolutely. Thank you, Elizabeth. That's an example of a smoldering crisis. I'm hearing some people on, so please put your phones in mute. So one of the crises that popped up, for example, was around 2017. A report came up and showed that with BBC, the males were paid more than the females. And it was actually on average over 9.3%. And like the biggest stars, I believe the biggest stars pay among the guys paid 2-point-something million pounds a year, while the lady was the highest paid was less than 500,000 pounds. So that was a big crisis, and that BBC had to deal with. And in terms of the sudden crisis, Hope has already given us an example. And the other example that comes to mind is the South Sudan war, which has been on and off since 2013. When it happened, I recall one of my friends had a business there and told me that at one moment, poof, it was just like the business blew up. It was in smoke, literally. And Martin says that the other example, unrelenting micromanagement without allowing staff the space to make input as an example of smoldering crisis. Yes, that's huge. When you over manage, especially highly skilled staff, they feel constrained, they feel like they can't move or push themselves. That to me, if you don't manage that to me is a smoldering crisis, because at one time they'll blow up in your face. Okay. All right. So let's go to now. Where do you classify the current crisis in the country or organization? Where do you classify it? Do you classify it in smoldering or sudden? You can chat away on that. How do you rate where does this stand? Let me see the answers. Okay, Sarah said sudden. Martin says it is between smoldering and sudden. That's an interesting perspective. I'd not thought about that. Someone just typed the word A. So, okay, A, smoldering. Okay, sudden, smoldering, sudden. Well, Elizabeth said, okay, I'm not seeing that, but Elizabeth Hope says sudden. Yeah, so depending on where you look at it, it is mainly sudden, really, but from one of us who feels that it is both. Leaning more towards sudden, and I said leaning more towards sudden because of the very fast implementation of lockdown measures. Yes, I agree. Elizabeth says sudden because we left office and the next thing we couldn't go back. That's Elizabeth. I agree, indeed. Sudden because we left, yes. So it's leaning more towards sudden. The smoldering, now I get where Martin is coming from. The smoldering, because then there are people who have created more stress and strife and more conflict around this, out of this. So in that, then it becomes to, sometimes one strain or one crisis can lead to another crisis. And what that reminds me of is, as leaders, how do we make sure that we do not pile crisis after crisis? How do we make sure that we do not create another crisis that was not in existence in the first place? Because, for example, if given what's going on, if you start shouting at people, now you're creating another unnecessary crisis in the moment, because then you're piling it up. Humphrey says it's a mix. The start was smoldering, the impact and realization is almost sudden. I like that, the way you're thinking from that perspective. Mixed. Yeah, sometimes things can start, it can be a mix indeed. When you look at it, depending on the context you're looking at, it can come from either way. Cool. Let me see. Whether we had any hands? Julia, let me know if we have any hands on this. And okay, I'm seeing this galaxy person. Let me. Is okay. Cool. Now, I would like to hear, and on this particular segment, I would like to hear someone, one of us can raise your hand, or you can type away. I would like to also hear, I believe at Success Africa, we believe in collective intelligence, whereby we can all contribute to the wisdom being shared. So it would be good to know, how has the current crisis impacted your organization, the team, and yourself as a leader? And how are you leading and managing amidst this crisis? So you can, if you're answering the first question, you can start with the word impact dash. Then you can talk about the organization or the team or you as a leader. Then if you want to answer the second question, how are you leading and managing amidst this crisis? It would be good to know you start with the word leading dash, then we know this is how you're leading or managing. Leading stroke managing, then dash, then you give the answer. The first part, impact dash, then you answer. Then we will be able to share it with the rest of the team. Then if you want to raise your hand and share with us, please let us know. If you raise your hand, then I'll be able to unmute you and actually, I can unmute you, can allow you to talk, then you just have to click the unmute button somewhere. But for now, at least you type away. How are you, how we can start with the impact. Let's start. Elizabeth is asking a very interesting question. And Humphrey, please, you're the, Elizabeth is asking, kindly help me understand how it started smoldering. So Humphrey, you can come on this because it's you who raised it, but part of me, I believe the smoldering part is if, for example, it was well contained and not, if it was contained from the source, as much as possible, possibly wouldn't be in this place. So for me, that was the smoldering part, in that there was a crisis in the moment, but possibly people didn't pay attention, they didn't contain it or to solve it in the moment. That's my assumption. But Humphrey, it would be good for you to also add in here. The impact, in terms of impact, Hope says programs with deadlines are not met. Martin says increased need to guide our partners in a situation where F2F, Martin, please educate me on what F2F is not possible. And he says this is stressful. Face-to-face, yeah. Face-to-face is not possible indeed. Because, and I know that there are some partners or donors who feel people have to be in the field and that sort of thing. If you're not in the field, if there is no face-to-face engagement, then it's not counted as, as a complete project or as a complete activity. So yeah, the impact is huge, and that means we also need to sharpen our communication skills. How do we sharpen our communication skills? And tomorrow we'll be talking about communicating amidst a crisis to give you some tips on how you can engage at a higher level. Julia, if you see someone with a hand, please let me know, and then we can you can actually moderate and allow them to speak. Then it would also be good to hear, how are you leading and managing such that the rest of the team can learn from you? How are you leading and managing? What's working for you? How are you managing so that the rest of the team here that is live could learn from us? Before I give you some particular tips on how to manage and all that, so for you, how are you managing? Let me see who is typing in here. Okay, so my belief is that people will be sharing later in terms of how they are managing this. Okay. Okay, let's then, as you think about how you're managing, and as I share, you'll be getting some insights. Let's talk about the 5 phases of a crisis and what this means for you and I. The first one is signal detection. You get a hint that, you know what, there is a potential crisis here. Let me first take a sip of water here. And then Elizabeth was asking around how it was smoldering, and Humphrey is responding that it was smoldering because the world was watching while the situation unfolded in China. It appeared as though it was far off, but it kept gaining ground and building up, gaining ground. Yeah, so, and for me, it was really mainly from the perspective of, yes, could it have been handled better there where it originated from? Yes, my belief is yes. And then before long, because it wasn't properly handled, and then it gains ground and then it becomes a sudden crisis. Signal detect. So now let's switch back to phases of a crisis. One is signal detection. And signal detection, you're able to say, you know what, here is a crisis. There is a potential crisis here. There's something that is building up here that I really, really have to pay attention to and take care of. And the second stage of a crisis, and this could also be something as simple as you see 2 people, 2 managers or 2 staff members you're leading quarreling. Well, that is a signal. That is something, that's a signal to say, look, there is a potential crisis here. Just make sure that you pay attention. Okay. And then the other bit is preparation stroke prevention. And what I mean by that, and if you give me just a second. Okay. All right. So I'm back again. I had just moved to mobile Windows somehow. Okay, cool. The other second part is preparation stroke prevention. And when I say preparation, it means you notice something, and then once you notice that, okay, yes, I had just moved to shift the. So Humphrey, are you able to hear me now? Is the audio clear now? Yes, it was just stepped away for a second.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, you're welcome, Humphrey. So with the preparation stroke prevention, now once you, like what we were talking about earlier, so assuming you have these staff members whom you notice, there's a brewing conflict or a potential crisis, you can get them to prevent that. You may get them into a meeting quickly to make sure that you prevent that challenge escalating. When I look at the way the our countries here in Uganda, how it's responding, when it comes to preparation, for example, I noticed the president has been asking for new cars and support. Now, right now, we do not need all the cars that he's talking about, but the preparation means just in case, then we'll need these many cars. That's preparation. So that's and then prevention is, you make sure that whatever is happening does not escalate. And then the third level is to ask yourself, not to ask yourself. The third phase is containment or damage control. Now, in an organization, these people could be blowing out of, things could be blowing out of proportion, And the containment might mean you give one of the personalities forced leave, or both of them forced leave. You're containing, you're managing, you're doing damage control. While for this big crisis that we are talking about, for example, here in the country or in the world, that's where the lockdown is. That's damage control as an example. Then phase 4 is business recovery. Now that's getting back into normal operation. Like in our context here, hopefully in the next 20 days or so, things may start to recover again. And then we start getting back into business slowly by slowly. That's recovery. And then business recovery, for assuming you're dealing with 2 staff members, 2 warring parties, or whatever the crisis was. But if we keep with that example, the recovery might mean now they first meet with you. You brief them. Okay, how are you mentally? How are you emotionally? Okay, instead of you coming in for a full day, come in 2 days a week. You're recovering step by step until they go to full steam. And then the 5th phase is learning. What are the lessons? What is the juice that we are picking from this particular experience that we need to carry forward, not only for us as leaders, but for the team or even the organization in general? What are the lessons? And then we'll be breaking it down further down the road, I beg your pardon. And remember that at each phase, leaders play a critical role in steering the ship in the right direction. Because at any one moment, at any one phase, you can steady the ship in the proper direction or you can drop the ball. Because someone was reflecting that for example, if certain countries had blocked off borders, just say a week before, things would have been different. See, that is timing. For you, the crisis, it could be that there is a crisis happening at the workplace, and it could have been that, hey, had you addressed the team in time, say 2 days prior, then they wouldn't have rioted, or they wouldn't have, someone wouldn't have sent hate mail and circulated it to everyone. So, how, in terms of damage control, if there was a crisis, what is it that you did? It could be that how you communicate or not communicate is going to blow the situation out of context. So at each phase, just note that it is critical indeed. Sarah is saying learning is all about IT inclusion, like Zoom for farms and government employees. Yeah, absolutely. So we definitely need to learn. IT inclusion is going to be huge. And I will tell you, Sarah, why the point you're raising, how critical it is. I was chatting with the former CEO of Celtel, prior to this current one. And he was telling me that, look, the digital divide between the North and South keeps widening, and the farther it widens, the farther the South will be left in the shadows of their former selves. And his point was the IT revolution. And some of the point you're raising is right now as we speak, because like say in the current global lockdown, so to speak, those who do not have access to IT gadgets, those who do not know how to use IT gadgets, I mean, the divide is going to be huge. So as leaders, how do we help people to make sure that that divide is not widening, but becoming smaller? Because if we don't, then we are going to have the difference between the haves and have-nots is going to widen even further. The knowledge gap is going to widen even further. What's happening in the world is going to widen even further. So that's huge. The IT inclusion part is huge. Martin says failure in managing in a crisis starts at signal detection. If a leader ignores the signals, then he or she has already failed. Yeah, I totally agree, Martin, in that if you ignore, so there are two kinds that I have to add. So there are those who detect and ignore. Then there are those who don't even detect. Then there are those who detect. They do not ignore, but they mismanage the response to the signal detection. And I will be talking about some of the mistakes that leaders make at different levels tomorrow. That will be, I believe that will be the first session. We'll talk about that. What are the what mistakes do leaders make at those different levels? And I notice, let me see, Hope says, as a leader, advise management on the slow down move and to allow staff to work from home, to be facilitated with data, to be able to communicate and catch up with the events. Okay, good. That was brilliant advice, Hope. And that's what we need to be doing to advise accordingly. Okay. So which phase is your organization currently in? And you see, identifying the phase of the crisis is usually difficult because you may not know, and you may not know have all these tools, and that's why we are talking about these tools. Because you see, when you have this image as a guide, it's like a dashboard to tell you, depending on where you are at, you say, okay, where am I at now? And then depending on where you are at, you can determine how to respond, and that's what I'll be sharing with you shortly. You see, and it's also a major reason why many leaders fail to manage crisis. They have no idea where they are at exactly, or they did not detect, or failure to detect, as Martin highlighted earlier. For example, this is an external crisis. Phases move quickly and can repeat themselves. See, the lockdown has been extended for another 20 days, okay, here in Uganda, because I don't know which part of the world you've been when you're listening to the recording. And Hope also says some leaders panic and are unable to make decisions. Yes, I agree, Hope, and that's why tomorrow we'll also be talking about the competencies. And for me, one of the core competencies is staying calm under pressure, because when you're calm, you can make proper decisions. So, but what does this mean for your organization? It would be good to know. For this extension, what does it mean for the organization, for your organization? I would really love to know. And if you would like to raise your hand, please raise your hand, and then we can pick you on and you share, you can chat away. So this further extension of the lockdown, for example, in Uganda, let me see, there's Humphrey here. Humphrey, you're allowed to talk, just unmute yourself and share. What does this mean for your organization? Humphrey, please go ahead.
Yes, I'm responding to something on crisis.
Just before the crisis, let people know who this is. This is Humphrey Rwabgahia. Yes, please go ahead.
Yeah, this is Humphrey Rwabgahia. I'm saying that a leader may not have the capacity to detect all potential for crisis, but the leader must be intentional to have mechanisms in place.
Yeah.
The team he works with to identify or sense when crisis is potentially building up.
Fantastic. Thank you, Humphrey, for that contribution. Good. Who else? You can raise your hand, and Humphrey, you can bring your hand down. Goretti, you can unmute.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Ethan. I just had a quick one. When you look at your phases, they seem cyclic.
Yeah.
And when you look at sudden crises, sometimes you don't have the time. For instance, you don't detect the signal that quickly.
Yeah.
There's no time to prepare. And then you straight away get into the crisis, and you like begin with the third phase other than the first and second. Is that what usually happens?
Good question. So my take on that is yes and no. So there are those that happen, and it catches you on the blind side, so to speak. Because I will tell you that there are two levels. Let me answer at two levels. One is sometimes we do not detect because we are not present, we are not aware, we are not paying attention to what is happening to us or around us or in our environment or our business. And sometimes it just will catch you unawares. I mean, you're asleep and, you know, someone a burglar hits your home or a burglar hits your office. You know, that was possibly you are not aware of that. But yet for this particular global crisis we are dealing with, I bumped into someone about 2 months ago. He said, you know what, this thing is much bigger than what we think. And as a country, we seem to be asleep. That is someone who told me about 2 months ago or so. So someone who is very aware, who pays attention to systems, having systems thinking, knowing that, hey, one event can spiral out of hand. So we could have or should have, and not should have, could have. There are those who prepared ahead of time, and there are some who didn't. Because I know one of my teachers was telling me how for them they prepared for this thing, like about these Americans, prepared like 4 months prior. They prepared and walked through all the scenarios. But did everyone do that? No. So yes, it can catch you unawares when you should have been aware. And there are some things that really happen that have nothing, that it wasn't a question of awareness. And indeed, you're now into damage control and all that. I saw Melissa. Go ahead. How is this impacting you, your organization?
Well, no, it's more about the issue of signal detection.
Yeah.
And while I agree that sometimes you can't detect the signal for this specific incident,
yeah.
There's also the environment around it. So your example of you might not be able to detect, you know, that a burglary is going to happen to you.
Yeah.
But if you know that there, you know, is a certain level of crime in your neighborhood, if you know you don't have guards or you don't have a security system or those kind of things, you can also detect the potential for something happening.
Yeah.
You know, you mentioned South Sudan being a sudden one, and yes, it was, but I was working in South Sudan during that time. I had left 2 days before the war broke out again. And while we couldn't have told you exactly what date it was going to happen, anybody who was there could have told you that tensions were high, there were problems going on, it had the potential for this. We had been in lockdown a couple times before this within the same 6-month period, and that the potential of something going wrong was there. So could I have told you that that's the day it's happening? No. But did we all know something was going to happen at some point in time within a period of time? Sure. So it's more about also the environment and the circumstances and knowing what's going on, not necessarily the specific incident.
Yeah, cool. Well put, Melissa. And you know, you remind me, Melissa, many years ago, I learned from a great teacher of mine that I really admire. He said that there are different levels of awareness. There are those who are in the zombie state, they don't know what's happening. Then there are those who are like in the blue state, they have just a general idea, but they are not as detached. Then there are those who are in the red zone, like they are like Marines, or so to speak. They are super aware. They enter a restaurant, they can tell you who is in front of them, who is behind them, who is around them, meaning they are really paying attention to what is happening. So for me, what you're bringing up here around signal detection is how aware are we as leaders in terms of potential opportunities and potential threats, potential levers to leverage, and potential moments of crisis that can throw us off board, so to speak. So that's what I'm picking up from your comment. And indeed, we have to, as leaders, have to be super alert in terms of what's happening around us. Sarah says we need to have a risk department so that we can ably assess the risk the organization faces. The phases are like you learn along the way or through the phases. Yes, and that's why you notice banks have like a risk manager or something like that. Well, for organizations that have the resources, absolutely. And having said that, my encouragement to you as a leader, I remember there's a program I used to facilitate under British Council for over 10 years called the Interaction Leadership Program. I remember one of our facilitators always used to ask, what are you noticing? And as such, as leaders, we have to walk through the world in our organizations, in our teams, to ask ourselves, what are we noticing? from body language to emails to news and all that, and be able to decipher that information and process it quickly to help do this signal detection at the right moment. All right, so I can see time is not on our side. I would like to move to the next stage, and that is, what do great leaders do in different phases of a crisis? That's what I want us to move into next. And I can see from Elizabeth, says, from Melissa's submission and from the example of someone who informed you, Ethan, that the country was not prepared makes me think that at times we assume, but we do not have information. Melissa clearly says that for South Sudanese, they could see the likelihood of the crisis, and I saw a documentary where UPDF was already building mobile hospitals counter the crisis, which means sometimes a crisis response is happening. We sometimes do not know what is actually happening. Yeah, Elizabeth, and from your contribution, indeed, so like UPD, of course, for them, they are sophisticated with these matters. They can tell this crisis indeed. That's why they're building hospitals. And for me, the lesson there is, how are we preparing? Because I was telling, like for me, I'll tell you something I'm doing like right now. When I'm communicating to my team, I do not promise them that this will end soon. I'm preparing as if it's going to take a long haul past May, definitely. And it is going to take past that. So it's how do we, at a micro level, that's at a macro level, but at a micro level in our organizations, individually, how do we prepare accordingly in the moment? So we need to switch the gears in terms of what great leaders do in different phases of a crisis. Let's look at phase one. So what do great leaders do in signal detection? Number one, they establish the organization's vulnerable areas. Is it operations? Is it cash flow? Is it technology? Is it people? Is it performance management? So they have to figure out, you yourself, you need to figure out what's the most vulnerable part of your organization or the team, whatever you want to call it. And then how can the organization's vulnerable areas result in a further crisis? And again, these are questions I'm inviting you to start thinking about, even this evening when you leave today's session, to ask yourself, which areas are the most vulnerable? And then you start thinking critically on how to manage potential crisis. When you're in preparation or prevention mode, you have to create a plan for responding to crisis. So, you find, say, armies or the like, they always have crisis response plans. So what's your plan? And right now, I feel each organization has a responsibility, or as the leaders, we have a responsibility to plan. And I will tell you something that I had really wanted. If you take nothing else, this is something I would highly recommend each one of us do. You need to plan and prepare and think, if this situation was to run the way it is, let's say for up to the end of the year, how will you respond? How do you manage? How do you prepare your team? For me, this is how I'd be thinking about it. And then you need to allocate appropriate resources for crisis prevention. Now, of course, you could be operating in an environment where those resources are also non-existent. But let's just suppose, like what I'm talking about, how do you put resources across to be able to deal with a crisis? And it can be it can be even beyond what is happening, because my prayer is that this program is not just about us responding in the current or present crisis, but it can help us to think about these situations ahead of time, because my coach and mentor always think of a backup for a backup for a backup. And that's part of preparing resources. Also, you need to ask, will the organization's infrastructure facilitate or hinder the resolution of a crisis? Do we have enough infrastructure? The Hope was talking about data, something as simple as data. Do we know how much data is required for people to manage this? So we need to ask ourselves, for example, at the macro level, is our health sector ready for that? Is your organization ready to withstand a crisis like this for the next 12 months? Now that is a stretching thought, But I will tell you something. I read a report, and the report was like, you know, this situation we are dealing in at the moment could take 12 to 18 months. Why? Because it takes about that much time to develop a vaccine. Now, with the current technologies, it could be possible to develop it in a shorter period because that's based on the past. But according to accelerated technologies, things could be done faster. But can it be done now? I don't know. But the key thing is to ask yourself, assuming it was to stretch for a year, do we have the infrastructure? Establish culture readiness. So great leaders establish the right culture. I was chatting with one of my colleagues saying, look, you have to prepare your staff to be able to work productively from home. And I was giving him some tips, and that's why I want us to do a program soon about this. So is the culture ready? Or are people the kinds where you have to be on their neck? Because if the culture is that of being on their neck, left, right, and center, it's going to be huge. But so you need to think about culture readiness. And then when we get to the containment or damage control phase, this is what great leaders do. They implement a strategy for limiting damage during the crisis. They make sure that that is done. Then they control the flow of crisis-related information. Here is the key. At a national level, for example, this particular crisis, it's just that we know the core relatable, not relatable, but the core absolute information, absolute in quotes, is from the president. But in your organization, you should be having someone who is the source of information in a crisis, whether it is this, or it could be a restructuring going on, and you know there's a sudden restructuring, so there should be a particular source. Or you could be funding other organizations, and there should be clear communication, and you know you're cutting funding for other entities, and there should be a clear communication to everyone and say, you know what, for this particular subject, you have to wait for information from so and so. That has to be clear, because in a crisis, if messages are coming from all different corners, then there's going to be a conflict in between, so to speak. There will be some misunderstandings in between. So there has to be as much clarity as possible, and as such, to minimize misinformation and distractions, you will need that one source. Who is in charge? They also establish stakeholders that need to be communicated to. And for me, I believe in hitting the nail by its head quickly and super fast. You don't wait around. You don't pretend like things are okay. Just tell your stakeholders the absolute truth. Tell them what the picture is and update them immediately and quickly. Don't just hope, just act proactively. I always tell people that hope is not a strategy. You have to step up. So Martin is raising a point here that China, being a great ally of Uganda, we should have used our alliance to gain more knowledge about the crisis much earlier than we did. But instead, we sat back and waited. Yeah, I hear you, Martin. And that's why I was saying that we were just hoping and waiting. And in my view, hoping and waiting is never a strategy. We didn't utilize that. And the point though which you're raising, Martin, where the Jewish finding in that is, how can we leverage our different stakeholders in different moments of crisis? It could be that the board is in disarray, or the board is fighting against management. That's a crisis. So who can you use as a stakeholder? Is there a particular donor that you feel the board could listen to and they engage in? Again, depending on your context. I'm not giving you straight and hard rules here, but it is also important to notice who are the stakeholders we can leverage to help in damage control of a crisis, in preparing for a crisis, in containing a crisis. So you look in the moment, if so-and-so is fighting, whom can I leverage that they possibly can listen to better than I do? And in that, for that conflict in my team, it can quickly be resolved. So there's always opportunity to leverage the stakeholders that we have. So I like that point you highlighted, Martin. Then create messages for different stakeholders and communicate accordingly. for me, that's important. See, I've never believed in, there's a saying, different strokes for different folks. Because I'll tell you, there are stakeholders whereby for them sending an email is not enough. You have to call them. And then there are those whereby before, of course, you even had to meet them physically. So even a call may not be good enough. You have to meet them, whether it is over Blue Jeans or Skype or Zoom, where they have to see you face to face. That's their language. So you have, and then you also have to ask yourself, what is the proper message? Okay, and then Humphrey says, simply communicating could have potential for a crisis in a crisis. Timely, tailored, and targeted communication is what is key. Spot on, Humphrey, I beg your pardon. So I like that point. Yeah, timeliness. It has to be the right message to the right people at the right time. Then as we, first of all, I want to hear from you. Is this stuff useful? Is this making sense to you? Is it adding value to you? Type in and say, yeah, if it is adding value. If not, say no. I want to know that I'm still talking to you and I'm still making sense to you, so that I'm not speaking to just the lens on my camera. So let me know, is this making sense to you? Sarah says, very much so. Okay, good. Yeah, let me know, and if it doesn't, just also let me know, or if I'm too fast, say Ethan, slow down. Goretti says absolutely. Okay, good. It also gave me a chance to take a sip of water. All right, good. Well, I like the fact that you're active in this because the more you keep the chats and the questions going, the more it also gives me energy to move forward. Martin says that the principle of together we stand, divided we fall is what great leaders hammer home in times of crisis. Staff need to feel they have to make input in crisis resolution, because failure to do so could mean doom for everybody. Well put, Martin, as if we were cut from the same cloth. That's a message I remember communicating to my team previously. I believe it must have been last week. Yeah, we have to, one of the moves have to be, how do we get the whole team to see, and I know we'll be talking about this a bit more tomorrow, how do we get the team to see that they are part of the solution? Not just part of the crisis, but part of the solution. And also the other, talking about this, it's also about the mindset I would encourage us to embody. If you forget everything else, I shouldn't say shouldn't, if you forgot everything else, let's also remember that in every crisis, there is an opportunity. And the question is, do we have the wherewithal, the creativity, the innovation, and the courage to challenge ourselves and our teams to be able to see that opportunity, to communicate, to emphasize, to innovate, to create new ground? Okay, business recovery. On business recovery, you have to establish the organization's short and long-term recovery plans. Then you also need to ask yourself, what critical activities must leadership be engaged in to recover from the crisis? So, and for me, part of that is communication, and being able to engage the team together. Create metrics to evaluate the performance of the business recovery stage. That's what great leaders do. They measure the numbers. They say, you know what, if this is to happen, then we need to do this. We have to measure this. You have to say you have to say, look, these are the things we have to look at. We need to look at this number of submissions online. We need to look at this number of phone calls. If you're a business, for example, I know one of our colleagues is in the hospitality industry, on the recovery stage, say, okay, we need to look to have at least 25% of occupancy compared to what we had before when the business was at its peak. So you need to be thinking about, what does recovery mean in your context? And on phase 5, on learning and reflecting, you need to profile the lessons learned. You need to reflect on past mistakes, things you feel could have been done differently. And you need to lead change of behavior to prevent future crises, because that history repeats itself. If you do not work towards changing behavior, then it means if a future crisis comes, then we are gone. the organization is gone, so to speak. So for example, people have to master the digital skills because, you know, again, what happens when another crisis comes and we're in lockdown, we should be able to produce even in those particular moments, no matter what. So we have to look at that. Someone says communication from my team members is mainly reactive. How do we get a more proactive communication among team members? In my view, there it's about you emphasizing to the team members, saying, look, if we really have, it starts at two levels. One is creating a culture of safety. That's been my experience, in that there are people who don't feel safe to communicate, to say things out. So at Success Africa, it's something I've emphasized, like when someone comes to our workplace first time, it's like they are holding back, like the Ugandan culture, typically, people fear talking to leaders because a leader is considered supreme or an elder. And as such, you have to consciously push people and tell them that they are safe. In fact, at Success Africa, what I emphasize is you'll never be victimized for speaking up, but you can be victimized for just gossiping. And as such, we have people, even the youngest person, who will challenge me as a team leader in front of everyone. Say, Ethan, you're not doing this right. Why? Because I've created a culture of safety for people to speak up. And when they speak up, I encourage them. Even when what they are saying is wrong, first of all, I say, you know what? I at least appreciate the courage for you to speak up. And I would encourage you next time, if you have something to say, you say it. And then I go ahead and correct them. Or if I'm the one in the wrong, I accept. So for me, it starts with creating the culture and showing the value of communicating openly. Because it's true, if people are not proactive, and when we say for them to be proactive, there are people, they fear when they speak up and let's say they made a mistake, they fear that if they speak up amidst a mistake, they could be victimized. So if they are victimized before for speaking up, then when they see something wrong, they may keep quiet until it has blown out of proportion. So that's something I would highly recommend. Someone who is on a Galaxy said, your presentation is making a lot of sense. I realize there are a number of considerations that we didn't pay attention to as a country in light of this crisis. Okay, good. I'm glad you're finding value in this. Let me see who else is here. I am hoping for some more practical tips for motivating team members in times of crisis. So Marco, I would highly recommend if you type in your email, Julia can mail you the presentation I did a couple of days ago on motivating employees amidst challenging times. So I have a full presentation on that. I would encourage all of us. I know like Goretti attended, but most of us here didn't attend. So I'll ask Julia to send you that presentation. It's more than an hour. You can see Melissa has sent in her email. Yeah, so Melissa also wants it, Marco wants it. If you really want that presentation, you can type in your email and say, please send me the motivation presentation, because it was really, you really get practical tips that are really, really useful. Sometimes people don't speak not because they fear, but they have over time realized that their feedback is not taken. Yeah, I hear you, Elizabeth, because so what happens is, whoever is typing in, Julia is taking note. And that is can we show that we value people's feedback? And when we say we value people's feedback, it may not mean that you respond positively to everything, but if they give you a list of 10 things and you respond to one, also remind them, say, you know what, that we may not be able to respond, but this we can respond to. And then remind them and say, you know, you made a request 3 months ago about this, and this is what we have done. The problem also I've noticed, sometimes leaders respond and they forget to communicate that they are responding to a need that was mentioned. So yes, there are people who feel that we have interacted with organizations where they say, even if I speak up, nothing will be done. So if we can show at least an inkling of interest, but practical implementation of something, and we communicate that, then that will encourage people to go ahead and communicate in future. Martin says phase 5 is as critical as phase 1. I believe that's what he was. Let me see. Yeah, let me see. Phase 5 is as critical as phase 1. If we do not learn from one crisis, then we are setting the stage for more crises to occur. Yeah, absolutely. For me, that we learn from our mistakes. And I should say we learn from our mistakes if we do not repeat the mistakes. Because if we do not, wisdom is you partly being able to pick the lesson. And what I like also thinking about also as an organization during this stage is not to just pick the lesson and then say, in future, if this occurs, what are we going to do? We'll do step 1, 2, 3. So that in a moment's notice, they don't have head knowledge, but they have practical steps on what to do. Okay, cool. Lead change of behavior to prevent future crisis. Okay, so those are the phases, and then they develop the organization's memory to prevent future crisis. Yeah, that's what I was talking about. Say, we notice this, we learn this, and for us here, when this happens, this is what we do, or this is how we move forward. And just before we move to the next segment, I would like to hear, in your view, what are other leaders doing that you admire and you wish you had the courage and resources to implement? Whether in this kind of crisis or in general crisis in your organization or when you're leading teams, what are other leaders doing that you admire that we wish you had the courage and resources to implement? That's something I'd want to hear you comment about. And then the second thing is, as you think about all these other 5 phases that I've given you to think about how great leaders think, my prayer is you should be able to notice, at this phase, I'm strong in this area, or I'm strong in this area, and this phase I need to pay more attention. So when we send you these slides and you listen to this presentation, I would encourage you to pinpoint those areas which you need to strengthen, and also celebrate the areas where you're really brilliant at, because definitely there are areas where you're very strong at, and there are areas where you, like for example, me, I'm extremely strong on phase 5. When it comes to picking lessons and preventing, and also when it comes to managing a crisis in the moment, I'm brilliant at troubleshooting. I know I'm super strong in those areas, while other areas I need to be stronger. So is there something else you've learned from other leaders that you wish you want to pick? Okay, so people who are saying yes, I'm imagining, oops, no, let me see if there are other insights. And is there any particular, before we switch to the next segment, is there any particular insight that you want to highlight? Okay, in the interest of time, allow me to move to the next segment, and then at the end, because I can see we are badly off with time, then I will, the next segment, then we can highlight. Elizabeth says, yes, I have learned that in a crisis, people need to act as one. Yeah, absolutely. Then Humphrey says, keeping ears on the ground, continuous assessment of the situation while managing the crisis. Yeah, absolutely. Hope says, keeping in touch with the masses, giving them assurance. Yeah, absolutely. You have to keep giving them hope. I'll talk a little more about that tomorrow. You understand there is a question from, okay, keeping in touch with the masses. Okay, cool. Now, the crisis, first of all, is this model, the insights from 5 phases, that a useful, Marco says explore future scenarios, absolutely. And with the Marco says explore future scenario, yeah, and you also have to explore them. Okay, if it is a great scenario, how do we respond? If it stays the same, what's the same? And when it is the worst case scenario, what is what do I do, and what should be the response? Okay, cool. Let's talk about crisis leaders versus crisis managers. Okay. And I know wherever you're seated, let me ask you to, stretch your arms up, stretch your arms like that. I know we've been down, stretch your arms. You can stretch your arms up. I don't know whether you're able to see me on the screen. Turn your neck left, right. Then push your shoulders backwards. Bend in a bit to lighten the load of your spine. Turn right, turn left. And of course, please smile. I know not everyone may be able to see you, but smile. At least that alone will help you. It will help you generate a bit more energy in your system. All right? Okay, let's talk about crisis leaders versus crisis managers. I really like this distinction between crisis leaders and managers. For the leaders, they look at both short and long-term recovery efforts. While the crisis managers, they consider only short-term recovery efforts, like how do we get out of this? Yes, but then what about the future? Crisis leaders think business in terms of a new paradigm. They think, okay, because I'll tell you, the world will never be the same again with this current crisis. Just like 9/11, the way we travel changed. You know, that business of removing shoes and all that changed as a result of the 9/11 crisis. But then now this current crisis is also going to change. It could be now a requirement for decades to come, where everyone must have a sanitizer at office, otherwise the authorities will close your business. So that's how leaders think, new, while managers think business as usual, okay? The big differentiator here is really their thought process. There are those who think maintenance, and leaders think creation, they think movement, they think innovation in the moment, whether they're in a crisis mode or not in a crisis mode. That's how they think. Now, as we flow, these are questions I would really like you to spend a minute thinking about. One, and again, we'll send you these slides and the recording later, but the slides, I believe it should be possible to receive these by tomorrow morning, is if you knew that another crisis, such as one very similar to the current crisis, was to occur in 6 months, not in a year or 2 years, and you are still a leader in your organization, what systems, processes, or business lines would you alter today? And again, this is more or less like the Marco raised that he learned about the thing about future scenarios. Yeah, let's think about such a scenario, because you see, when the military is thinking of, because some of the best institutions to study around strategy are the security forces or the military. When they are thinking about strategy, they think about all scenarios. If we are advancing, this is how we move. If we are in a crisis or one of us is hurt, this is how. If we are retreating and we are defeated, this is how we are moving. They have all those plans, so you need the same. Then how would you prepare your team to thrive amidst that pandemic or that crisis? And the crisis, you can think about something that is sudden or smoldering. So there should be other smoldering crises in your organization that you need to start preparing your team about. It could be, I notice we usually have this challenge of reporting on time, and therefore organizations are not able to release funds, or our partners are not able to release funds on time. Moving forward, this is how we are going to hold that. Then how would you guarantee the success of your organization despite the crisis? How would you guarantee that? How would you approach that, so to speak? Then is there anything stopping you from implementing these strategies right now? And if it is, how can you bypass that? Because you can say, oh, yeah, I could, but there is this other challenge. Yes, but leaders think, okay, if I can't do A, can I do B? So B may not necessarily totally solve the other problem you're thinking about, but possibly B could reduce the impact of that future crisis. Okay? So I would like you to chat, not to chat, but to think about these questions in 1 minute. And then I'm going to request for your permission to give us like 15 more minutes to finish the other part of the presentation, which is very critical. And then before we wrap it up, because we had promised to finish by 4. Marco says leaders are not afraid to take decisions with incomplete information. Crisis managers ask for more information. Yeah, I hear you, because you know, when you don't have to wait for all the information. If you have enough information to make some decision, then you go. And then there are some crises where you don't need any information, you have to move. I mean, when you hear an alarm at the back, you know, a fire alarm, you don't start researching in encyclopedia about fire management or something like that. You run out. Sarah says, I'll prepare my teams to embrace IT solutions so that we can still work at home. Great. So in terms of moving forward with this, Martin, performance monitoring that focuses on outputs as opposed to inputs, time reporting, work hours. Yeah, so outputs, results. We just need that. That's the situation now. That's what it requires. Reporting results, so to speak. We need to change our systems and processes to go to that level. So I would like to us to also highlight something very fundamental here. And that is, how do we get the temperature of what's happening within our team? And that brings in the profiling the fears and challenges of your team amidst a crisis. Because if you do not profile properly, then you won't get the full picture. See, the best practice for showing that you care, you need daily check-ins by supervisors and managers. And for us, daily check-ins, for us at Success Africa now, we are meeting daily. And then the first check-in is, how is your health? How is your family? Is everyone okay? That's what we ask first thing before any agenda in the business. Then weekly or bi-weekly team meetings. Some of us could have been meeting monthly. Now you have to have these weekly or bi-weekly team meetings, of course, online. Now, there are particular areas I would encourage you to be thinking about as a leader to profile your team. On the spiritual side, how are they meeting their spiritual needs with places of worship close? Because there are people who are locked in the paradigm of, I have to be in a temple, in a mosque, or in a church for me to experience my creator, for me to feel spiritual. So how are they meeting their spiritual needs now? Do they take time to self-reflect and meditate? Because spirituality is still very important. On the social and emotional aspect, are they finding, again, these are questions you can start asking yourself and probing your team further, whether one-on-one or as a group, or to start asking them, so like this particular segment I'm raising, this is something you could share with your team. Say, by the way, as we move through this, it would be good to reflect on these questions. You could even say, you know what, I was attending a training and, you know, these are questions that I learned that we need to be thinking about. Are they finding ways to have fun and still be happy despite what is going on? Because if they are not having fun, if they are not creating more time for fun, guess what? They are going to bring that stress on the Zoom call or the Skype call, and their productivity will go further down. So you need to ask and probe them further. How much time do they spend watching the news? So I was encouraging my team to minimize the amount of time they spend whether watching TV news or reading all these negative news about especially the current crisis, because the more they consume that, the more the energies go lower and therefore can't be as creative or as productive. So you need to probe them on that front. What are they doing on that front? Does anyone need counseling? This is the time. If the organization has a budget, and there's an organization I was chatting with, I was telling them, look, we could, for them, they are from the entrepreneurial side, who are talking about how we could potentially provide for them, like we could have like a retainer arrangement whereby their staff can call our pre-select, our associate counselor, whom they can talk to freely. Because some of these people are going through issues and stuff that they cannot share with you as a leader. But if, for example, you had a budget, that's something you could provide and say, you know what, we have this professional counselor. You can call them anytime. This is the number and all that. So then we start it on a return. If that's of interest to you, we can always talk to you about that. And if you don't have the budget, you could ask them to invest in a counselor or to hire a counselor or a therapist, or to talk to a mentor or someone more mature about issues they may be having. On the physical side, how is their health and that of family members that I talked about earlier? Are they exercising and sleeping enough? I'll be very honest with you. The first the first 1 week, I was readjusting because the exercise routine I had mainly was in the gym. I mainly like dance fitness. It's very intense. And now all of a sudden the gym was closed. So I didn't rearrange mentally. And so within a week's time, I started feeling some funny pains. And then I called my doctor. I said, I'm feeling some funny pains. I've never felt this way. I mean, it's been the last 1 hour feeling these pains. It's like, are you exercising? Because it could be an issue. And that evening, I remembered that I could put a Taibo video on screen and dance and kick and box. And within the following day, I was very fine. I've not experienced those pains again. So there are people whereby if you do not, so for example, it's like I called my doctor, but not everyone has that privilege. So you need to alert them about, are they exercising enough? Are they sleeping enough? Because when you're in a crisis, you need those resources. You need the physical resources. Then when you sleep, they need to be able to recover. And guess what? This applies to you too, my friend. Okay. Are they eating balanced meals? For me, all that is critical. From a mental perspective, are they creating anything new? Because if your team is not being pushed to create something, to generate something, they won't feel as valuable. So this is the time where you need to trust your team a bit more and say, hey, I'm working on this proposal. I'm thinking about this proposal. Can you come up with a concept note? Even when you're not sure they will come up with something valuable, engage them. Have you thought about this? Or can you create this? Can you help me with this? Let them create. On the mental aspect also, are they reading or listening and watching valuable information? Because this is very, very critical moving forward to think about all this, okay? And then the Kango says thoughts. Some organizations have put in place full engagement programs to keep staff motivated amidst the current crisis, looking at all possible engagement factors. Good considerations as crisis strokes fear. Absolutely, Kango, that's fantastic. Yeah, you need to keep your team engaged because I remember when we were young, we used to hear that something like an empty mind is a devil's workshop, meaning if the mind is not engaged, then they are more apt to be distracted by all sorts of stuff that is not helpful and positive. So, yeah. So before we move on to the next tool, beg your pardon. So, Julia, let me know if you're in a position to come on board to engage at the next level, and then we take it from there. Is this useful so far, guys? Again, team, that this useful, you can let me know, type or raise your arm, and then we take it from there. Julia, are you able? Let me know if you're able to come on board, and then we take it from here as we conclude.
Yes, I am.
Okay, cool. Martin says this is where our social skills come in handy, using them to get the team members to open up and discuss their challenges with the leader. Absolutely, you need your social skills. So I'm going to invite Julia to take over for a few more minutes, and then we see how to. So Julia, you can rush us through this because they are two tools we need to pass on to you to think about. These will mail you this evening. So we need to walk you through them quickly, which will help you think through. So Julia, so ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome Julia. Julia, go ahead.
Okay. Thank you, Ethan, and for that great presentation.
You're welcome.
We are continuing to look at tools for the prepared leader. We called this, Ethan, if you would continue to the next slide.
Okay.
Actually, if you would switch off your screen share, then I can share mine.
All right, yeah. I've done that.
Yeah. Are you able to see my screen? I need to be sure.
So I am seeing the slides from your side, critical success factors. Sarah is telling me we are running out of time, and yes, we are going to be super quick with these tools, such because okay.
Okay, we are looking at establishing the firm's position.
Okay, Julia, if you may go to presentation mode.
For that, we are not just looking at your current position, but how do you reposition position aside from simply establishing the current position, because again it will not be the same again. So if things are not going to be the same again, your current, how do you stay relevant? You need to reposition. And one of the tools that we picked up is the critical success factor analysis. Now, this analysis is valuable because it helps you identify
Julia, we are losing
areas in your organization or business that must succeed at the end of, yes?
And yeah, so there are people who were asking. No, the audio is flying in and out. I may have to.
Are you able to hear me?
Yeah, so it's just in and out. And Humphrey is asking, are we going to present all the slides today? Because he saw that we have 57 slides. No, Humphrey, that is for tomorrow. So there are some slides that, a big portion of the slides that you saw, that is for all the 2 days. So just to be clear. But you're jumping in and out. You may have to just let me give you 30 more seconds. If you're still not clear, then I may have to take over from this side.
Okay, okay.
You could mail me your latest presentation, and then I take
succeed.
it.
Okay. Are you able to hear me, Ethan, and everyone on the call?
At least I'm hearing you for now. Please continue, then I'll alert you.
Okay, great. So this analysis gives you vital background information to base new decisions and map out a plan ahead of your competition, and also to build a stronger organization, because crisis weakens us, unfortunately. And right now, what we need most is strength. How do we strengthen our teams? How do we strengthen ourselves as leaders? How do we strengthen our organizations? Now, this tool is most suitable for the NGOs and INGOs, for that matter. We have another tool that is more suitable for the business organizations. However, I would like us to stay with an open mind, because sometimes we find knowledge in unlikely places. That's a quote I keep reminding myself of. Sometimes you find a gold. What's the advantage? The advantage is that as you go through a critical success factor analysis, you're able to present identified and agree upon priority areas, which are the critical success factors.
So, Julia.
In a formalized yet simple way.
Julia,
yes, Ethan.
This is what I'm proposing. I can see
please.
the team keeps raising that you're on and off, which is true. And also some members
kindly continue. Yeah.
Some members saying, you know, on and off season, some members are talking about their meetings. So this is what I proposed, team. These tools, what we did is, besides the slides, we actually have the workbook, so to speak, not the workbook, or the note, so to speak. So my proposition is this. I'm going to let you know what we are going to cover tomorrow. Julia, if you, so what we'll do is we'll send you these tools to work through, and then tomorrow we'll start like with a brief Q&A in terms of, let me see if I can find my screen, whether this is the one, yeah. So tomorrow what we'll do is, let me see. So tomorrow what we'll do is we'll mail you these tools, and then tomorrow what we'll do is we will start off with that with some Q&A. You walk through them, and then because they are super straightforward, and I know I had promised that by 1:15 will be done. I know we have only 1 minute to go. And let me see, I didn't do the screen sharing. I beg your pardon. Just give me 1 minute, because I need to share this with you so that you know what we are covering tomorrow. Share, okay. So let me know if you're able to see my slide. The most important part of leading powerful amidst a crisis. I hope, Julia, is that what's showing up on your side? Okay.
Yes,
okay,
certain.
Cool. So Julia will mail you the tools which you can play with, and then tomorrow we can kick off with those tomorrow. And then I want to leave with you one thought, which is just this one slide, and then I tell you what we will cover tomorrow. For me, the most important part of leading powerfully amidst a crisis is leading self. Take care of your physicality, your mental resources, your social emotional resources, and your spiritual resources. The same questions we are raising for the other people to profile them. You cannot give what you don't have. Take care of yourself, my friend, because if you do not take care of yourself, you won't be able to take care of others. Make yourself physically stronger, mentally stronger, spiritually stronger, emotionally stronger, then you'll be able to help others. And then tomorrow, besides doing the Q&A related to the tools, we'll also look at what usually makes it difficult to identify the different phases of a crisis. And then the meat of the presentation will be around the 6 key competencies for leading powerfully amidst a crisis. This is going to be super important and super powerful for you. And then we'll also give you a framework for crisis communication. So would like to switch the mode here, so to speak, and let me know, what did you find most useful today? Tomorrow we'll be starting again at the same time at 2:30 sharp. We'll do, once you receive the tools, please work through them so that we start from the Q&A related to these tools. And then tomorrow when we start at 2 sharp, I promise that tomorrow we'll finish on time. That's my promise, since I notice you all keep time coming in, since you have the high level view of the presentation. So let me know what you found most useful today, and then we wrap it up from here. Let me see, Sarah, yes, Humphrey has a raised hand. Let me see if I can track Humphrey down. Yes, Humphrey, go ahead.
Yes, Ethan, you've talked about starting at 2. I thought we were starting at 2:30.
Yes.
Slip of the tongue.
Oh, my apologies. Thanks for picking that on, Humphrey. Yes, we are starting at 2:30. I beg your pardon. Thank you. Hope found 5 phases of the crisis is very important. That's good. Sarah says learning about the crisis phase can be important. Okay, and for me, the key thing is to notice, even more important, what's the one thing you're going to do differently? You can type it in, write it somewhere, commit to do something with your team tomorrow before we meet, morning hours. What are you going to do with your team to lead them even better in this moment of a crisis? That's something I would encourage you to do and to think about as we wrap up the day. Learning about the crisis phase and all that. Cool. So tomorrow we will start the same link you have for today, the same link for tomorrow. Sarah says profiling. Profiling was important. So thank you so much. Once again, I would like to thank you for showing up, and I will see you tomorrow. We'll see you tomorrow at 2:30, the same link. And thanks to, again, Julia, my co-facilitator, and the rest of the Success Africa team, and to the participants. Thank you so much, and have a fantastic evening. Bye for now. Right.